Check.
Yeah.
Mic test.
All right, perfect.
My name is Alex Crowson. I am an artist and podcaster from Portland. I am here with my friend Casey Clapp.
Hi, Russ.
My co-host on the podcast, Completely Arbortray. I'm very interested. Is anyone familiar with our podcast? Can you raise your hand? We have the people who invited us.
We got those folks back. Hi, guys. How's it going?
So we have a weekly show about trees. Every episode we choose a species of tree, and then we have some sort of, Casey brings some sort of a story about it, and its place in culture or cuisine or religion or history, etc. And then we wrap it up with a rating. We give a rating to the tree. We play a little game. We do a Q&A, and that's the show. But tonight we are here because my friend Casey has written a book, his very first book. This is his debut book.
That's right.
This is The Trees Around Me.
That's right. Thank you. It's really exciting to be out here. I think it's been about 10 more years since I've been out to Orcas Island, so I'm very happy to be back. It's only been like a couple months, Alex.
It's been 10 or more weeks for me.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, Alex, you played with another band recently. That was Isabel Walker, right?
Yes.
Yes. Alex is a professional musician also. He doesn't bring up a lot of things about himself, so you guys gotta like every now and then. Make sure everyone knows this. This is why he knows how to do all these things in the background. And thank you very much, Woody, for helping us out.
Yes.
Get everything set up. Ingrid, thanks for having us out here, and everyone else who's set up, and everyone who's coming here to listen to us talk a little bit about trees, but mostly just talk about books.
Yeah, well, Casey, for people who aren't familiar with you, why don't you kind of give us the origin story of your world in trees?
Okay, it sounds great. Thanks, Alex. So let's see. So for those of you who don't know me, I am an arborist, and I started doing arboriculture once I learned that I didn't like to do landscape architecture, and then I did a little bit too much of a overcorrection to forestry. So I initially went to the University of Oregon. I'm from Portland. We're both from Portland, Oregon. And I ended up doing a bunch of work in my mom's backyard. I built a pond, actually. That was the thing that I was like, I'm going to be a landscape architect. I built a pond. And that was my big moment. I did this like aptitude test. Do you remember those aptitude tests?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I did that, and it's like landscape architect. So I ended up going to school for that. Hated it, but learned how to learn about plants. That was the thing that I was like, that is interesting. More of that, please. And I ended up taking all of these classes, and actually I did theater at the same time. So I was doing theater in high school, did a theater major for a couple of years at the University of Oregon, and then was getting like B's and C's in my theater classes while I was getting like top of the class in my tree ID, tree physiology, landscape architecture classes. So I read the writing on the wall, went over and said, forestry, that's going to be the thing. I want to learn about trees. But it turns out that forestry is a much more industrial kind of thing than I was imagining it to be, for better or worse. And I ended up learning about forest ecology and hydrology, forest dynamics, what trees grow when and how, and all these kinds of things that a forester needs to know, how to cut down trees, namely, how to make the most money off of the trees that you cut down and plant. And that was also not really what I wanted to do, and I found this one class by, at the time, he was the state urban forester, Paul Reese, in Oregon. And he said, he put a class together which is called Arboriculture and Urban Forestry, which for those of you who don't know, that is the people and the crews that work on trees outside your yards, outside houses, along your streets, in your parks, that kind of thing. They're working to maintain trees that are in and around where people live, not the trees that are out in the wild forest that you're managing for some other purpose. Namely, this is for managing trees for safety, but also for the benefits that they provide. We call them ecosystem services. And the thing with ecosystem services in a city is that you're managing the trees not to get big, to be cut down so that we can make the most money. We actually get the most benefits and services from working with the trees and keeping them on the landscape as long as possible. So you want to get the biggest, best, healthiest trees because those are the ones that are going to provide the most rainwater interception. They will be healthy and happy, and they're not going to fall over or die on your house. They're going to provide all these services. So I started working on that realm, and over time started to become, I got a master's at the University of Massachusetts, and then came right up into Washington, worked at Seattle as a consultant. From there, I basically started doing every kind of thing you can imagine, doing reports for new industry or new developments. I did risk assessments, did tree appraisals, went all over and assessed every kind of tree you could possibly imagine for every kind of situation. And then went to work for the city of Portland after that as an inspector to basically say, I'm going to make sure that all the trees that can be saved are saved. The trees that have to be replanted are replanted. And it basically held developers to account whenever they were doing something. And most of the time, they weren't doing the right thing. But very often you'd run into a developer who was like, man, I just really want to save this tree. You guys are making me cut it down. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, we're not. Let's work together on this. And I ended up, over that time, getting a huge amount of experience in learning how to identify every kind of tree. Because if you're an artist, you can't just say, oh, there's a tree, and just leave it at that. People need to know a little bit more. If you identify a tree, you then have to know, rather, in order to do anything with a tree, you have to identify it first. You are telling someone it's going to be sick, then you need to know what kind of tree it is to know if it's sick. The best example is some of our deciduous conifers, the Don redwood, the larches. They lose their needles, they turn yellow and brown in the wintertime or in the fall, then they lose all their needles. If you don't know what you're looking at, then you're going to look at this tree and be like, wow, this tree just like completely kicked the bucket at the end of fall, so let's cut it down. It must be dead. No, that tree's still alive and it will then produce more leaves and come back the next year. So learning to identify trees in that one little instance is wildly important. So that's kind of my big origin story up until about 5 years ago when Alex and I were in his apartment. And we are both creative people. I did theater. He had got a degree in film. And we're like, let's just like do something. Let's just come up with some creative idea. And I pitched the idea to do a tree podcast based on one of your favorite podcasts called Doughboys. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what Doughboys is all about?
Doughboys is a podcast about chain restaurants. It's a comedy show, kind of under the guise of being about food. So we wanted to do Casey really knew how to hook me. He said, let's do that, but with trees. And that's sort of what our show initially was aimed to be.
Yeah, exactly.
It's evolved into its own thing.
Yeah, so the idea was we just wanted to put out a project. The project was, let's talk about a tree, let's identify it, and then talk about something related to it, and then give it a rating and review, because they, of course, give a review of the food they eat. So the irony is, they're doing chain restaurants, so they are reviewing Burger King and Chili's and Red Lobster. Everyone knows exactly what you're getting when you go to one of those chain restaurants. So why would you need to review it? That's the fun of it. So we were like, all right, let's do this with trees. You walk out, and we learned that everyone loves. They have a really special relationship with trees. Like you showed me an image of some people hugging a gigantic Western red cedar. So people really have a lot of passion. So Alex and I quickly, and I mean like episode 3, learned that if you and I do something kind of facetious, where we're like, oh, this tree sucks, blah, 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 people send us emails that day, and they're like, actually, no. And then they tell us all the reasons they really love this particular tree, for whatever reason.
Every tree has a defender.
Yes, absolutely. Even the worst offenders, Alex at least likes the tree of heaven, and that's the tree that everyone can universally agree to hate.
Don't tell people.
I won't. Yeah, okay, gotta listen to the episode, you'll learn. But yeah, so we ended up doing that, and since then I basically quit my city job, and we've been working on the podcast full time, and I also do some consulting on the side. Basically, if anyone wants to know about trees, I'll say, yes, I'll tell you about trees. But it gave me the opportunity to ultimately take off, I don't know, essentially 2 years of my life and stop doing everything except the podcast, and write this book, because it's all about the trees around you. And you don't really have a whole lot of time to write a book about trees without having a very flexible job and a very good job partner who will say, yes, you may not come into work today, and focus on something else.
Well, Casey, let's go back to the beginning of your idea for this book. I feel like a lot of maybe technical guides come from, have you ever tried to do this thing? There's got to be a better way.
This is the infomercial side of it all.
What were you lacking in the Tree ID book realm, as niche as it is? That you wanted to really nail with this book?
Gotcha. Great question. So there is a small little hole in the literature, as they say. And this is the thing, like if you're doing a master's degree or you're writing a research paper, you got to find that spot where there's nothing, that void, where there's a question that needs to be asked or hasn't even been thought about being asked, but still needs the answer. And that is where this kind of came in. So how many of you have a tree ID guide in your house right now, or you have seen one, you want to buy one? Great. Is it for like the Pacific Northwest, something like that? Okay, well, that's reasonable. So there's a lot of guesses out there. So that is one of the kind of guidebooks that you can find. You go to any store, you go to any place that is like a national park, and you say, hey, I want to know about the trees. And they have, trees of the Pacific Northwest. There's a great book called Trees of Oregon and Washington. There are dozens of different books that talk specifically about how to identify the trees that are native to a place. So I was like, great, that's a wonderful place to start. There's also a bunch of books like the Sunset Guide or the Durr's Manual of Woody Landscape Plants, these huge tomes that are very large and talk about every single kind of plant that can grow in the Pacific Northwest or in North America, something like that. The Tree Book is a new famous one that came out a couple of years ago. Actually, oh my gosh, 6 years ago now. So those books will tell you every single tree that can grow somewhere, but none of these books are helpful for you if you are not already a professional. So I have multiple degrees in arboriculture. I've studied and taught tree ID for years. I can walk out into this yard, I can go into this town, I can go anywhere in the Pacific Northwest, and I generally have an idea of what trees could be there, which trees are not there. If you get something like the Sibley Guide to Trees, one of my favorite books, we have used it on the podcast dozens of times. We love to point out all the interesting trees. It does all the native trees of North America. Now, if you picked that book up and you walked to downtown and you said, what's this tree right in front of me? There's no good way for you to figure out where to start. If you were to pick up the trees of the Pacific Northwest, walk out into your backyard, or if you live on the mainland, you have a big city, you're in Seattle, Portland, something like that, then it's very likely that the tree in your backyard is not, in fact, a native tree. So it's not going to be in your native tree guides. Then you say, well, what tree could it be? If there are 60 native trees to the Pacific Northwest, you now have approximately 73,940 other options to choose from. How do you choose what tree it is? That's where this book came in. I needed to figure out a way to express to people, well, where to start? What kind of trees is it that what kind of trees are here, so you now kind of have a big group to choose from. And one of the things I took from some of my classes back at the university is, if you are getting tested on a tree, say you learn how to identify 100 trees, maybe 3 of those are linden trees. When you go to identify a tree, if you're like, okay, I know this is a linden, now which linden could it be? Your brain is not thinking, what are all the lindens in the world and how do you tell them apart? Your brain is thinking, I was taught 3 lindens. What are the differences between those 3 lindens so that I can figure out which one is which? Maybe one is fuzzy and one has big leaves, the other has small leaves. So you look at it and say, okay, none of these are fuzzy, so the fuzzy one is out, but now one is big and one's small. Well, I have the small one, so this must be the little leaf linden. Easy as that. We just solved that problem. That is what I've done here, is basically say, here are all the trees that you may find in the Pacific Northwest, in and around where you live, your streets, your parks, your backyard, your front yard, and that then says, here are the only trees that you're going to find. So you don't need to think about everything. If you can narrow down a tree to what it is, or what it could be, then you are now already there. You don't have to guess, whoa, does this tree grow here? Is it here? If it's in this book, it grows in the Pacific Northwest.
And Casey, the sort of process you lead the reader through to find the tree in question, it's called the Stepwise Journey. And I would love for you to share what that means.
Yeah, thanks.
How it's used in a really practical way.
Yes, that is, okay, thank you. That's a great question, because it's a very silly name for the process that I came up with. Most people, I don't know, there's a lot of ways to figure it out. In fact, I was doing this earlier because, ironically, there are 2 trees in the downtown area in East Sound here that I cannot identify. They're pines, but they are uncommon trees. I can tell you this because I know all the common trees, dang it. So I was looking through what's called a dichotomous key. And is anyone familiar with a dichotomous key? Okay, so a couple people are. So a dichotomous key, as it sounds, is it's a key that basically is your choose your own adventure. You basically say, is this tree evergreen or deciduous? Yes or no. If yes, move to question 2. If no, move to question 3. Then you move through there, and it slowly but surely asks yes or no questions, A, B questions, that lead you down to a species. So what happened is the stepwise journey kind of moves away from that, but takes the idea of elimination, where you need to start looking at a tree in some way that is repeatable. So instead of looking at a tree and just kind of staring at it and saying, what is that tree? How do I figure it out? The stepwise journey is the practical way for you to say, what do I look at first? What do I look at second? What do I then need to do to get it down from a genus to a species, or from multiple plants to, or multiple options to a very few amount of options? And the other thing about this book is that it is split up by leaves that look similar to each other. So if you see a leaf and you're like, oh, it kind of looks like this, but not quite. Just flip forwards and backwards through the photos, and you'll end up finding a tree that is that appears close to this tree. Not necessarily closely related, but as long as it looks similar, I'll be introducing them all next to each other. So the stepwise journey is this means of making sure that you can look through every single tree and pick out precisely which things to look at in a sequential order. And if you do that for every tree, you'll start to notice the differences. Like, for instance, one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that there are different arrangements of leaves. This is one of the biggest, best things that we've started talking about when we first started the podcast 5 years ago. And it was the thing that I was like, nobody knows this? This is like the very first thing if you take a class. And it's looking to see if the leaves pop out oppositely from each other or alternately. So you have leaf on the left, leaf on the right, leaf on the left, leaf on the right, or if you have two, left, right, left, right, left, right. If you can figure that out, you have now taken off huge swaths of other trees that it is not. It's the first step in tree identification. So I started this book with that stepwise journey in mind, thinking, how can I design this book to take you through that entire process so that by the time you get to deciding which tree is which, you've done so much, or so many little things that are very simple and easy that make it so that by the time you get to figuring out, I think it might be this tree, you know that you're at least in the right spot. You're not necessarily just looking up random leaves hoping that you can figure out which one it is.
Wonderful. So, Case, you wrote this book for 2 years.
Yes.
And I was witness to all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was tangentially witness to all of it. I didn't sit in your room with you while you wrote.
Yeah, honestly, if you did, you might have been like, Casey, you need to go to sleep, buddy.
Yeah.
You need to go to sleep tonight.
Well, tell us about that process, Casey. Tell us about the research involved and what it took to. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of information.
It is a lot. Thank you.
What a great value.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, for only $26.95. The process was, I mean, first it was a years-long process of going out and exploring the trees, going and looking to see what trees are where, going to find, what trees are actually out there. As a working arborist, you're in the middle of the city working with trees all the time, so you get an idea of what is and is not there. So I looked initially to see, I made my own list. I went to an Oregon State Landscape Plants guide on the web through Oregon State, and I just scrolled through, and it's all alphabetical, so I just went A and scrolled through all of the genuses until I was like, okay, there's the ABs, those are the true firs, there's Acer, that's the maples, those are definitely there. And then I kept going through until I decided all the ones that I thought, personally, were very common. Pretty easy to do at that point, just kind of saying, oh, I recognize that name, do it, I don't recognize that name, I don't need it. So I went through then each genus and said, okay, how many maples do I think are really common? Then I looked through the inventories of cities like Seattle and Portland, Vancouver, Spokane, Missoula, Boise, and just went through and numbered all of their different trees. How many trees are there? What are the species? And then from there, I narrowed down which ones I think are in our region generally. Because I want to make sure that this is the whole Pacific Northwest. So you can go to Anchorage, Alaska, down to the bottom of Oregon, and essentially out to the Rockies, and all those trees in the urban area are going to be covered. And some of them are not. Like I said, there's a couple weird species out here that aren't covered. So it's only the common trees that you'd find. And I still have 350 different species in there. So after doing that, I then went to the actual hard work of it, and I went through, I think what I did is I opened a beer, and then sat there and said, I'm going to drink this whole beer. And while I'm doing it, I'm going to imagine which trees look similar to each other, and I'm going to put them in a big list. I thought I could do that, Alex, pretty much like in a day.
Say that again. What was your process?
So, it was open a beer.
Right, okay.
And then try to work.
Okay.
I think Ernest Hemingway said one time, write drunk,
yes.
Edit sober.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'm not going to be drunk, but I'm going to sit here, I'm going to go through this. So I ended up having that beer and getting through, and I think I got through maybe a handful because I wanted to go through and say, how should these all be lined up? Which trees look similar to each other? And I made this huge long list that then it turned out to take far more beers. So I ended up not drinking any more beers after that. I just said, okay, I'm going to put this down, and maybe I have to do this a little bit more intensely. And I ended up writing this huge list of every single tree that needs to be. Then I went through alphabetically, doing the profiles of each one. Well, as I was doing these profiles, I basically was saying, what is different about this tree? How can I tell you what it looks like? But also, how do you compare it to other trees? So what separates this pine from that pine? So it's not just me saying, here are the characteristics of each one of these trees. I say, here's the characteristics of these trees, and that's the important one. This tree will have this if it looks, the one that it looks similar to is this species that looks like that. So I very explicitly had to find what's different and unique about each species as compared with other species around it.
Right, because so many trees that are in the same genus or family look so remarkably similar if you don't really zoom in. So I think that's one of my favorite parts of how you chose to write this book is it looks like this, not like this, which is very slightly different.
Yes, and if you know exactly what you're looking for, that is the key. So one of the big things I talk about in the book is knowing what you're looking at versus what you're looking for. If you can answer both of those questions or confidently know what you're doing on either one, then that will take you directly to what you're trying to find. And it will help you also look closer at a tree than you have ever looked at a tree before in your life. And that's one thing at the very end of the section that is all about the stepwise journey. At the very end, I say, congratulations, you have now just looked closer at a tree than you have ever in your entire life, and probably ever than most people ever will. And all you're doing is just finding these small little traits that when you see it, you'll be like, oh, well, that was easy. Look at that. And then now you have all of a sudden found out that you can identify a tree just as easy as anyone else, because we are all very good at doing this. We've talked about this on the podcast, in that if you are a person, you already know the differences between most leaves. You can see the differences in the color green more than any other color. You can see all the small, minute details. It's kind of like looking at a wallpaper. You see two different wallpapers. Your brain is not figuring out what's different about them, but your brain really quickly can say, those are two different patterns. And you're really good at pattern recognition. So all I'm trying to do is unlock that pattern recognition and tell you, oh, here's the pattern that you're seeing, and here's the difference between them.
All right. So Casey, keeping in mind that only a couple people here have the book in their hands, would you take us on a tour of the book?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I would love to.
Would you like this as a reference?
Okay, yes, I will take this book as a reference. So if you guys want, you can also snag a book and walk through. But yeah, so the way that I have designed this book is in particular to making it as easy and accessible to anyone who wants to either learn how to identify trees or who has already identified trees and knows them really well, but maybe wants to know, okay, I want a full accounting of the trees in my area. So at the very beginning, if you open it up, it starts with giving the big ways that this book is split up once you start looking at the individual trees. So you open the very first cover and it says conifers on the left, broadleaf trees on the right. And then it breaks down what you can see with individual little photos, or not photos, those are drawings. I did all the drawings, by the way. So if you guys...
You took all the photos.
Thank you. I did also take all the photos.
Wow.
It was a heap of work. I didn't actually know I had to, but I did. And here we go. So yes, all the photos, all the drawings, all the writing, everything except the index is all me, done over by the wonderful actual book designers at Mountaineers Press, which is the nonprofit out of Seattle, which I'm so happy I got to work with. So the first thing, as you're looking, you'll see, oh, well, there's like 5 different things in conifers, 5 different things in broadleaf trees, and so if you already know what you're doing, you can skip straight to the section. Once you look at this particular trait on this particular plant, you'll know exactly where to go. Now, if you are not familiar with what those things mean, then just open right up to the very beginning, and I start with describing what exactly is a tree. And you know what? How many of you have given that even one moment of thought? Okay, you raise your hand, you've given thought to it. Fabulous. It is a question that is far more detailed and complicated than I ever thought before starting this podcast. I believe Alex and I have had at least 4 or 5 episodes where we talk about what is a tree in a different context.
Can we give our current opinion based on our research?
Yes.
Your research of what a tree is?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I think we've landed for now that a tree is a tactic, a strategy.
Yes. Yeah.
So there are, and this is where I run out of words to say. Catalpa.
Yep.
Can you briefly the catalpa thing
yes.
about vines
Yeah.
versus trees?
Catalpa is in a family called the Bignoniaceae, and catalpas are one of the few tree examples. They're all very closely related, but there are trees, there are vines, and there are shrubs, and there are herbs. They're all in the same family, very similar to like the rose family. Yet each one has split off and taken a different strategy. One decided, I'm going to stay really small, I'm going to grow as low herb, just maybe 10 or 12 inches off the ground. Then there are some that grow as shrubs, which we all know, maybe a little bit higher up, you have to walk around a shrub, multi-stem, that kind of thing. Then there are some that grow as lianas, which are those woody vines like Tarzan swings from and things like that. Those woody vines sometimes will stand up on their own and turn themselves into trees. Those are catalpas and other different tree things in this family. So essentially that family said, you know what, I'm going to go take this strategy and be a shrub. I'm going to go do this strategy and be a liana. I'm going to do this strategy and become a tree. But it's all just this evolutionary decision-making process or any kind of pressure that says which works best in a certain situation.
So now that we're all on the same page about what a tree is, let's go through the rest of your book.
We're going to do questions at the end. Is that okay?
Well, I just have a question that's coming up. Why is it important to identify trees?
Oh, that's a great question.
I just came to that, and I thought, that's important to know now.
Yeah, so the big thing on why I would say it's important to identify trees, coming from a professional arborist standpoint, is if I'm telling you your tree is sick, I need to know what that tree is to know what sick even looks like. If I also am an arborist who says, completely misidentifies a tree, it would be as if a veterinarian took your animal and said, you got a really nice gerbil here, let's go see what's wrong with it. And you're like, this is a rabbit. Are you going to trust that veterinarian to treat that animal if they can't even identify what actual animal it is? It really ruins the credibility, and also it means that they're not going to give the right treatment to the animal. So with trees, it's the same thing. If you don't know the species, you don't know the profile, what it likes, what it dislikes, if it's safe to climb, if it's safe to remove, if it's even dangerous in the first place, you won't be able to know how to treat that tree. You also won't build any kind of relationship with it, and that's one of my important big aspects that I usually work on, which is if you just look out there and you see a wall of green, then you don't really think too much about it. It's called plant blindness. There's also the term plant awareness disparity that's been thrown around, which basically means you're blind to the plants around you. You don't see that they're individuals with different lives that they live, with different characteristics. You just see, there's green over there. And you don't know that some are invasive species that are bad to have in the environment, some are really good, some are rare. What it appears to be a little tree is actually a really ancient old tree. What appears to be a giant tree is really just a toddler. So it helps you add value to the trees around you in a way that makes you more conscious of what is there so that you can see what needs to be protected, what needs to go. And also, you build a relationship with it. It's like learning so many names of so many friends. You walk around and you're like, oh, well, there's a big, beautiful tree. Maybe you'll remember to come back to that dogwood in the springtime because you know it's going to be really beautiful, that kind of thing. So it builds a connection more than anything.
So let's run through the rest of this book, and then we'll have a little Q&A section. I think we're about out of time.
Okay, perfect. We'll do this quick little journey, and then we'll open up to questions. And if no one asks any questions, then we'll just vamp for a little bit and just chat along. So you don't want that, you guys. Alex and I talk professionally. We could do this all night. So the first kind of section is basically how to use this guide, which you kind of already talked to. The guide is designed to use as a means to learn, starting with a stepwise journey. And if you already know what you're doing, you're already kind of familiar, then it's meant to be used as a resource for you to figure out the trees that you don't know, or maybe you find something like, ooh, I can't remember this one particular detail. I'm going to go find that tree here and use it as a means of learning a little bit more about that particular species. So the first thing that I do is I start with giving some of my idea of the stepwise journey. It starts with context. You walk outside, there are different trees growing in different contexts. For instance, this is a really nice, well-maintained courtyard area. That is different than what you'd see in a street. It's different than what you'd see in a backyard. And backyards are different based on where they're at. We were at a farm earlier today, and that farm has different species. Many of them are not native. Those are going to be way different than what you see planted in that parking lot. So the context is one of the big things that I like to start with because it really helps. Sometimes you don't even need to guess anything more than where is the tree growing and what's it growing kind of on and around, then you can pretty much figure out what it is. If it's a parking lot, there are like 10 different species that generally are planted in parking lots. If it is someone's backyard with a swamp, there's like 2 different trees that would be growing in a swampy area in our area, in your backyard. So context is where I start. And then I move from the context to the form and texture, where one of my favorite pages, one of my favorite things is to look at silhouettes of trees. So let me see if I can do this. Ta-da! Just like that. So different silhouettes of different trees will tell you a lot about them. And even just looking at these silhouettes, you can see, wow, those trees look really different. It's not something that you are kind of surprised about. Whoa, all right. Oh no, you're good. I love it. But it's a thing that a lot of people may think, oh, the trees don't have any leaves on them, I can't tell anything about them. But these silhouettes are all trees that have no leaves. So as soon as you look at them, you're like, wow, those are really different. So you can start to parse out these things, and we haven't even gotten more than 30 or 40 feet away from the tree. So then I move through to talk about the individual parts about a twig and leaves and buds, which seems like it's going to be something that's uninteresting and boring and technical, but I promise you it's not. That is the section that gives the most information on the little details that if you know what you're looking for, it will immediately fast forward you to the next parts. So this is the little thing that basically says, if you want to know what you're looking for, you need to know what you're looking at. Here is what you are looking at. Then, from that section, I move on to talking about the bark and the fruit and the flowers, and then I go to some of my favorite sections, which I'm really happy to share. This is another bit of my, I call it, not psychosis. Psychosis was when I was writing it. This is more psychopathy, I don't know what it is, but I decided that there's a lot of little things that just tip me off to different tree species. So I made a bunch of lists, and these are just charts filled to the brim with different trees that have different traits. And the reason I thought about this is because I have gone through my life sometimes, and I have seen a tree, and I'm like, wow, that tree is really beautiful. What tree could that be? So maybe I'm down in like San Diego, and there's this gorgeous pink flowering tree, and I'm like, well, where do I start? You can't just look up pink flowering tree San Diego. You're not going to have Google tell you anything interesting and helpful with that. So I tried, trust me, I know that this is the case. So I ended up making all of these different charts that say, if you see a general thing about a tree, then it will be in this chart saying, this is one of the species that has this thing. So for instance, berry-like fruit that's purple, blue, or black. There is maybe a dozen or so species that would have something like that. So if you're walking around and you see a tree that has shaggy exfoliating bark, or a certain kind of fruit that you see hanging on it, I've listed it here so you don't have to go through and try to find which individual tree in this entire book has that particular trait. You just look for that particular trait in these little graphs, and then you got it. Then, following that is my phenology calendar, which is all of the times and the colors when every tree around our general area is blooming. So if you go out in spring, you see that you're in mid or late spring and it's a pink blooming tree, you can go out to this and say, all right, I'm here in mid-spring, there are 5 different species that would be growing with pink flowers. I'm going to now investigate those 5 species. Now you've gone from 350 different species to 5. Your job's pretty simple. After that, I then go into individual species, starting with the conifers, then I go to broadleaf trees, and at each junction where there is a species that's very confusing, I create also. Thanks, Alex.
Can I be of help?
You can, sure. Here, do that. You can look at that. So I made a bunch of graphs, and there are 24 of these throughout for any tree that appears to be very hard to figure out. So this right here, for instance, is the scale-leaf conifer. So the Port Orford cedar, western red cedar, giant sequoia, things like that.
This is page 63. Is this mic working at all? This is page 63.
Oh, page 63. So that is a means for me to basically make it as easy as possible for you. If you say, okay, I know I have a scale-leaf conifer. Instead of trying to figure out which scale-leaf conifer it is, you can just go straight to that and figure out exactly what the species is by comparing what example you have in your hand to all these different graphs. And then I go through every single species, and then I have plenty of little sidebars and introductions to the genus. So if you want to know what makes an oak, what makes a cottonwood as opposed to anything else, I have an introduction to each one of the big families. And then I have a few different graphs that compare interfamily relationships. Like you see something that is in, say, the rose family. So everyone knows cherries and plums and apples, they're all these beautiful trees. It's very hard to tell them apart if you don't know what you're looking for. So what I've done is create a beautiful graph that says, here are the fruits that you'll find on these trees, or here are the leaves, here are the buds that separate all the different cherries apart. So I've tried to make everything as absolutely as simple as possible for anyone to pick this book up learn how to identify their trees without needing to have, as it says on the very front, no botany degree. I don't want someone to feel like there is a barrier for getting to know their trees. So I've done everything in my power to make it as easy and simple as possible. So that is a big tour of the book. At the very end, there's a huge glossary also, which I wrote myself. So it's one of my proudest moments in this entire book. If you're interested in anything that has to do with trees, it is in there. I have definitions for literally everything. More things than I should have, honestly. But it's in there. I think it's like 8 pages long.
Well, there's the book, The Trees Around You. And this is Casey Clapp, of course.
Wow, thanks, Alex.
And let's do, well, speaking of Clapp, let's... So let's do a little Q&A. If you've got a question, please raise your hand and give your name and your question, and then Casey will repeat it in the mic for the audio purposes, and we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Jill. Can you tell me what's your idea of like some of the craziest trees?
Yeah, okay, that was Jill asking about crazy trees. Great question, Jill. Okay, so let's see. Some of the craziest trees, honestly, they're normal trees, but they're just cultivars. So a cultivar is a cultivated variety. It's a portmanteau. And it means it's a tree that the horticulture world has turned into some kind of monstrosity. Now, I say monstrosity because I'm kind of a tree purist. I want the species, and I want it because I know it really well. I know what that looks like. I know how it's going to react. I know its profile. But cultivars can be different shapes, different colors, different growth habits. They can do a lot of weird stuff. One, in fact, we are parked next to, it is a giant sequoia. Most people think of giant sequoias as the world's biggest trees. They grow to be, 30 feet in diameter, 250 feet tall, that kind of thing. But there is a variety that is planted in the parking lot that is called pendula. And it looks like Cousin It from the Addams Family or something like that. Every single twig, except for the very tippy top, the very, very top growth point, grows straight down. So it looks like every branch is draped over it like a really shaggy animal with this kind of fur that is braided and going all the way down. I'm trying to think of like honestly, I think of something from like a sci-fi movie, not an actual animal. And so it's out there growing. It looks like nothing you'd ever expect if you were thinking giant sequoia, but it is a giant sequoia. So I think it's usually the strange cultivars that grow in really weird ways that are usually the ones I think of for really strange trees. But if it's a natural one, it's got to be the crazy trees that grow at the highest elevations. The whitebark pines, the Sierra junipers, a lot of the really strange bristlecone pines that have been there for 4,000 years. If you're sitting in the same place for 4,000 years, you develop character. That is for sure. So those, I think, are probably some of the craziest trees that I've seen. It's a great question. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm Kathy, and as I'm sitting out here looking at Turtleback, I'm wondering if you're any relation to Norton Clapp.
I have no idea. Okay, Kathy just asked if I have a relation called Norton Clapp.
No, you're related to Norton Clapp,
I have
the
no clue.
co-founder of Weyerhaeuser.
No way!
Because he owned all of Turtleback Mountain here at one time, the Weyerhaeuser family.
Wow.
And so your name is spelled the same,
Yeah.
and I was just like, is this some genetic thing? And now
Yeah,
Okay.
we're just into trees. I don't think it is because I don't think anyone else in my family really cares too much about trees. They're like, good job, Casey, we're really proud of you. And then I give them a book and they're like, man, that guy really took that to extreme. We really shouldn't have encouraged him so much.
Okay.
No, so I don't think so. It is a very rare name. So my guess is back somewhere there are more Clapps. My grandfather, who I have this name from, grew up in Beaver Creek, Oregon, but I don't know where the rest of his family came from after that. I heard Germany / England.
The old Weyerhaeuser's German.
Yeah, exactly. So it might be that, but I think it was spelled with a K back then, and then it got switched to a C. So I really don't know, but I would look, because that's interesting. You're the second person to ask that, actually. Not that particular person, but if I'm related to someone in the last week, just go out.
Hi, I'm Alice, fellow Minuteman.
Hi, Alice.
And so I'm wondering, you said you got your master's at UMass. How difficult was that for you, being so familiar with the trees here, then to kind of go all the way across the country and have to learn kind of some new ones?
Okay, yeah, it was Allison you said.
Alice, yeah.
Alice, okay. Wait, Alice? Yes. Okay, Alice asked about going to UMass, so go Minutemen, you're in lovely company here, about moving from the Pacific Northwest to the Northeast and talking about the trees. or identifying them. So funny enough, it was a walk in the park. And the reason for that is that most of the trees that we plant that are non-native out here in the West all come from Europe or the East Coast. So those trees are also planted in the streets, in the parks, in the backyard, or they just kind of pop up and grow there natively. So while I was moving over there and taking a tree identification course, they were telling me all of the trees that I had already known. The western or the eastern white cedar or white pine, all over the place. Arborvitae's native out there, we planted all over the place out here. The red maple and walnuts and a bunch of European species, they all are planted there in the same way as we plant them out here. Over here, we have different native trees, so it's really some of the obscure native trees like the red pine. That was one where I was like, I really don't know that tree. But for the most part, I think I knew almost every single tree by the time I went there. But then, actually, I went to North Carolina State on exchange just before I took an exchange at UMass, before I did my master's work there. And it was the Southeast that really threw me because they have so many different species of trees that are, it's just, their diversity is out of this world. And to give it one example, they have more species of oaks native to, in fact, just North Carolina. But if you expand that out to the whole Northeast, they have some 32 oak species, which is more than all of the conifers native to the Pacific Northwest. So all of the pines and firs and Douglas firs and larches, spruces, all of those added up, there are fewer than they have just oaks down there. So really crazy diversity. That was definitely the place that really threw me. Yeah, Robin.
Hi, yes, I am Robin. Hey, I want to know, when I'm walking around, like, Moran State Park, and I see all these giant trees, and I'm sorry, I'm the beginner. I don't know. I got the book to learn about
This is perfect.
but I don't know what kind of trees they are. But I see these giant, like, shelf mushrooms on the trees, and I see tons of poisonous mushrooms all around the tree. I want to know what these mushrooms are doing for or against the tree. Is it beneficial or not beneficial to it?
Well, that's a great question. All right, you got to point me to any of these poisonous mushrooms because almost no mushrooms are poisonous. There's like maybe a handful. Some will make you not feel very good. You'll get very bad tummy aches. But there is almost none that will actually have some kind of neurotoxin that would kill you. Wow. So you're not going to be like really comfortable that evening, but it definitely won't kill you. So most of the time, mushrooms are, your body will tell you quickly, stop eating that. If it tastes bad. If it tastes good, you're usually going to be fine. But the thing with mushrooms is that most are really, really good. And we started here at the very beginning talking about our patch and our sticker over here that's called Fungal Associate. And that was from day one of our podcast, where I was talking about Phaeolus schweinitziae, which is a disease that grows in the base of Douglas fir trees. And the mushroom on the base, when you find it, it's called the Dyer's polypore. And it is this kind of bloomy mushroom that pops up, and it has a decay that grows at the base of this tree. But they have grown together and learned how to deal with each other for millions and millions of years. So the mushroom is decaying the tree, but it's also creating habitat for when that tree ultimately falls over. So in other senses, away from the tree, in more of an ecological sense, it's doing a purpose. It's adding to diversity, it's adding to the ecology of the area. That is a decay fungus. There are also fungi that grow in the soil as mycorrhizal fungi, and they would be growing, helping the tree get nutrients, get water, and that kind of thing over the course of their entire lives. They make that connection immediately as little seedlings. But which ones do which aren't always clear, except for one thing that you noted, is those mushrooms that are popping out from the side of the tree. So those are called conks very often, C-O-N-K. And those are always going to be some kind of mushroom that is either living on the living tree, which Phaeolus schweinitziae, the Dyer's polypore, does, or it's a saprophytic fungi, which is decaying an already dead tree. So if you see something like the red belt polypore, so these big, wide, fat ones that have a really red, kind of dark rouge ring around it, that tree's already dead, and it's just decaying the already dead tree. That's also the case for lobster mushrooms. If you see any of those coming out, always going to be on a dead tree. Ganoderma, the artist conch, if you flip it over, you can etch into the bottom of it. Those are also on dead trees. So it's really just a process of the forest kind of rebuilding and decaying itself and kind of going through that recycling. So most of the time, if you ever see fungus in the forest, it's doing some good thing. But it's all about values, right? If you want the tree to live, fungus is bad. If you want the fungus to live, trees are fine, but they're food, so they're really kind of neutral. So yeah, whenever I go out, I try to identify the fungus and see if I can have some kind of idea of what's going on in the forest around me as well. But usually, they're always just kind of living their lives and just kind of in the cracks and just taking care of things that usually people are like, nah, I'm not even going to look at that. So I'm happy you're seeing them. That's a huge step for so many people that I've met. All right. Well, Alex, you might have to go here.
I think I'm about out of time.
leave.
I mean, I don't mean it
I'm
in
going to
another
awkwardly
way.
shuffle
You can
out.
leave. Yeah, Alex is doing a songwriting workshop with some
great.
folks tonight. Yeah. Meanwhile, next question.
Is there so mutts as dogs
Uh-huh.
seem to be healthier,
Moving over here so Alex can walk over there.
because it's all like the mixed up thing and it's not a purebred thing.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing for trees?
There is. It's called hybrid vigor. So usually, it's kind of the right thing. So if you are a dog, dogs are all one species. There's not multiple different species of dogs. So if you are breeding a dog down to certain things, you are kind of taking all of their genes and pushing them into one thing and selecting for particular traits. Those particular traits are on genes and chromosomes that also have other traits as well. So selecting for one selects for a group of traits. You have to really work to kind of find the really right balance. So often that's the same thing with cultivars, where if you get a cultivar of a tree with these big, beautiful flowers, they often are riddled with diseases. And that's because you are choosing the ones that have this big, beautiful flower, but they lack the genes that are resistant to these other things over here. So you end up basically needing to really take care of those. So that would be the best equivalent with trees, is you have these very intense genetic things that are forced in one direction that come with these negative consequences in other places. So if you go back and let those trees grow and reproduce and ultimately come together to create what would be a mutt, it would just be more like a normal species. Better disease resistance, better all these other things, but the flowers are going to be smaller and not as pretty. So it's just the same as if you are wanting a really nice purebred golden retriever, and then you breed it with something else, you're going to get like kind of golden retriever-ish things with the other thing as well. So you get that genetic buildup kind of is reduced a little bit. It's a little bit better. But with hybrid vigor, as a quick side note, hybrid vigor is when you take two trees that are very close related, hybridize them, and then they grow like gangbusters, like kind of to a ridiculous degree. And that is also something that's likely if you take two different gene things that have been separated for a long time and put them together, now they kind of supercharge their ability to compete with each other. So, but they're not always able to reproduce, so it's kind of one of those things where they grow really fast and big and strong, but then they can't make any babies, so we have to grow them a different way. Alex, are you out of
I'm
here?
out. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Alex, so much.
Alex.
We'll see you later. Where are your keys?
Wait, so that
I
tree you
put
were
on the
talking
table.
about,
Yes.
can you just like follow up with that?
Yeah.
That tree you're talking about, you can only do that, I mean, that doesn't happen naturally.
Yes, it would only happen in two ways. One, if you force it, kind of take pollen from A and put it on the flowers of tree B. Or if you do what's called a garden experiment, and this has happened with multiple different trees, like the London plane tree, for example, where it is a hybrid between the eastern sycamore, which is from southern Europe, and then the American sycamore, which is from eastern United States. Those two trees never grew together for millions of years, but they were very closely related, and then this ocean grew up around them, and then they speciated out to be different trees. Take both those trees, plant them in the same garden, and all of a sudden their pollen's going back and forth, and then they're like, oh hey, I haven't had that pollen in millions of years. So then they end up doing a little bit of their own hybridization, and then they can have seeds that come up. But it has a lot to do with, essentially, do all of their genes match up perfectly? If 99% match up perfectly, the tree's going to grow fine. But then when they try to produce their offspring, often it doesn't quite produce the right thing. But that's not all the time. It's just this one example. Some have viable offspring, some don't. But it has a lot to do with a lot of weird genetic stuff that it's too much for me to get into now. You had a question right here, yeah.
Yeah, over the course of writing the book, did you find any trees that were going extinct or on the brink of extinction?
Yeah.
Is that rate increasing?
No, honestly, not in writing this book. I have in the work with the podcast, we found a lot of that. But that's kind of the whole point of the podcast, is to find weird trees doing weird things and talk about that, and kind of get into what's making it go extinct. But for the most part, the trees that we find in our cities are doing one of three things. One, they're common enough that we're planting them. So if they're being planted, they're in the nursery trade, and we have made millions upon millions of them. They're all over the place. The second thing is that they're native trees that are growing in, or they're remnants that we left from cutting down a forest, but we left a couple trees over here that we built houses around that. Or those trees are planting themselves in. So I'm sure you've seen Douglas firs and different species from the native forest growing, on the margins of your landscape or in a bed that's just kind of left around. Then the other third thing is invasive trees, and that's the one where they are definitely not in any way endangered. They're the opposite of endangered. They're actively not from here and growing themselves in our new habitat because they don't have the same checks and balances, or they're just very well adapted, but they grew up some other place. So for the most part, the endangered trees are kind of the specialized ones that you'd only see in really particular gardens or arboreta or something like that. So you would find them, but they're not really common enough. So I didn't really include them in here because I wanted to make sure to not get too much added in, so that if you walk out, you can say, oh, there's 4 different species of this kind of tree, so I'm going to just figure out which one this is based on the traits that I see. And if none of those traits match, then I have a couple things where I'm like, if it's none of these, then maybe look into this tree or that tree or that tree. Then, if it's not any of those, at least you know, okay, this is a pine of some kind, and now I can go try and figure that out myself. But that's the real exciting part, in my opinion. So for the most part, most of the trees in here are pretty well established already.
Thank you.
Yeah. Did you have a question? You raised your hand.
I did.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask it. I'm trying to figure out, I want to buy a tree for my son and his wife. They're building a house, and they built their house near a forested area, which they had to clear, unfortunately. And I want a tree that feels natural, but has a sort of different feeling, like maybe a maple, where there's no maples whatsoever. It's kind of not the most attractive forest that they are near. And I just thought a beautiful branching tree that's healthy in that spot would really enhance that spot.
Yeah, trees means everything.
Yeah, and I just was wondering, because, a beautiful branching tree that also has beautiful leaves, like a maple, comes to mind, but there are just no maples on that hillside. Not even big, well, there's a few big leaves, but not in that spot where you look.
Yeah, because that's our only real big native species of maple. We have 2 little diminutive guys that grow around, but the big one's always going to be the big leaf maple that's in the native forest. Now, there's also Norway maples, but don't plant those because they're slightly invasive. So if you have one, you'll soon find a little bit of weedy guys growing around. Sugar maple would be a really delightful choice. Sugar maple is, of course, the one we get maple syrup from. It grows perfectly well in this environment, but it also is the one, if you're driving around and you see like fiery orange, yellow, red color with a little bit of a more upright kind of shape to it, that very likely might be a sugar maple. They would be a beautiful choice. In fact, it has this one. Hold on. That's one right there. I got this one in Massachusetts all those years ago in Amherst. So this is most definitely a sugar maple, so it kind of has this upright, all its stems grow upright. I know it's hard to see. It's usually way bigger than my arm, so don't take that as an example. The other option that comes to mind is planting the Oregon white oak, what others up here call the Gary oak. We had this conversation yesterday.
Okay.
Gary.
That's a big topic here.
Oh, it better be. They're native here and they grow really well. Their fall color is a little bit to be desired. They kind of just turn a russet brown. But there is nothing better, in my opinion, than a mature oak tree for a few different reasons. Their form in their silhouette is absolutely undeniable. There's no oak tree in the entire world that has as beautiful a form as our native oak. It's the only one native to our entire region. You have to go down to Eugene, Oregon to find a second native oak in the Pacific Northwest. And so that big, huge canopy, they grow very slow. So in my opinion, they have this like status. As you get a big old tree that takes a long time to get big and old, you're like, okay, this has got some staying power. It has created this sense of place where it grows. And because it's a native tree, it really does not take too much effort to keep it alive. In fact, too much effort will probably kill it. Usually it's just let it grow, right?
Yeah, but they like super dry and kind of a west
Well,
exposure.
they can actually take any as long as you don't change it. So if you plant it, leave it, and let it get used to those conditions. They do very well on those dry things, but that's not necessarily because they prefer it. It's just because nothing else can do it, and they can. So if you plant them in a spot that is very dry, they'll crush it. But in the Willamette Valley down in Oregon, they actually grow in seasonal flooded areas, and they love it as long as you don't change the conditions. So plant it, let it grow. Do not change it if it goes from dry to wet to dry to wet. Don't say, we're going to make it wet the whole time, or we're going to make it dry the whole time. Keep it to do, or let it get its adaptations done in terms of that individual plant. Call it good. So that would be another option. And here's one that I made, which is going to be 100% not going to stand out, but the Western red cedar, all the native peoples everywhere have always known this tree as the tree of life. Now, every culture in the entire world has a tree of life, so that's not just like this one tree. But here in particular, the Western red cedar was a really, really renowned tree, so that one has a lot of really intense symbology with it. If you look into its history with the native peoples and for us as well.
Yeah, another thing, they do have some beautiful cedars on their property, and I've noticed if you have dead tips, I'm like, that doesn't mean like the death of that tree.
No, definitely not. No, that's actually one of their ways of coping. So it's not going to be the most perfect tree, but if they are living their lives, that is what we call retrenchment. So the tree essentially says, it's too much up here, it will reduce its top by just killing it. But if it gets the resources, it will grow a new top. So I would definitely leave it. Again, don't change too many conditions there. And certainly don't prune any of the branches off. Don't change any of the soil areas around those Western red cedar. They should be okay, but that is what they do. So give them the opportunity to essentially adjust themselves down, and then they'll continue to regrow. So unless something really goes horribly wrong, they'll probably just continue to adapt their canopy to whatever the amount of resources that they have.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Was there a question back here?
Yeah, it was actually about the Western red cedar.
Okay.
I've heard they're not doing so hot up here.
I think they're actually doing too hot up here.
Oh, spicy take. But I worked at a place where we had a couple alternatives to plant. So Alaskan yellow.
Yeah.
Do you have an opinion on which one of those could help replace those if climate change did affect the cedars here?
That is a really good question. So it was, what would we plant to replace the Western red cedar? The first thing that comes to mind would be, I think, a giant sequoia was the first one that came to my mind. Those get huge, so they don't always necessarily do the right thing. But they are in the same family, they have the same kind of bark, they share a lot of different traits, but they can take the heat without any problem at all. The Nuka cypress and the Alaska yellow cedar is a wonderful choice. They just are a little bit more, they don't get quite as big, but if you are growing a new tree, of course you can't expect it to be exactly the same. Port Orford cedar is another good option. It can take a drought condition, but it doesn't always really thrive there. So I've seen them growing in some of the driest places, which really blew my mind. But they're native down into the Siskiyous, which is a very seasonally wet and cool place, and then really dry in the summertime. So I know they can take that as well. But also, I think junipers can be planted a lot more. We don't plant, here there is the maritime juniper, or the seaside juniper, which grows natively, but you can definitely find some other juniper species and kind of more eastern and southern species of cypress that can be planted. And the cypresses used to actually grow up here. There's pollen that show that cypresses were a big part of this forest some 10 or 13,000 years ago. So you might be able to plant things like the Arizona cypress would be a good option. And then a few others that are probably from southern Oregon, the Siskiyous region as well. But they have different form, different shape. But those might be some fun options to look into, because they'll take the dry summers, but can still take the wet winters we have. Yeah, great question. With that, thanks everyone. Really appreciate you spending time.